Well, aren't I a lucky boy? Some kind soul lent me their Tesla Model 3 to try out for a few days. Today I'll tell you how that came to be, and more importantly, talk about my likes and dislikes of the car itself. A few months ago, I reached a fairly major milestone with the channel, namely that I was coming to 52 videos, one upload a week, for a whole year. In order to celebrate, I decided that the 52nd video would be something a bit special, a drive in a Tesla. The idea was to combine a treat for myself with a video I had in mind about the Tesla user experience. Sadly, despite a lot of trying, it wasn't to be. I had a lot of little problems trying to organise it and ran out of time, so I had to have a Polestar 2 for a day instead. That little saga is documented in that 52nd video, which I'll link from the end screen of this one, as well as in the description in case you're interested. However, a generous benefactor who saw that video stepped forward and offered to lend me their car to experience, and it seemed rude to say no to that. So firstly, thank you David for the loan of the car. That was very generous and is much appreciated. And I need to do a little disclaimer before I start. For full disclosure, I should say that I am a Tesla shareholder. I own a few shares, so bear that in mind as you watch the video. With that housekeeping done, let's get into the car itself. How, I hear you cry, did I get on with it? The simple answer is I got on very well. Extremely well. It has been both fun and extremely useful. Not everything was positive. There are a few things I didn't care for, but in general, it's an absolute cracker. You know, I think Tesla might be onto something. I felt really at home with the setup and drivability of the car right from the outset. However, that's not simply good fortune. As well as being generous with his car, David had also been generous with his time. He spent plenty of time getting it set up for me, going through the plethora of options, choosing sensible defaults for some things, and discussing the various choices available with others. That was extremely valuable, of course, as I got to benefit from his prior experience. Prior knowledge is fairly important because some of the controls are not entirely what you would expect from other cars, and we'll cover a few of those as we go. What caught me out first was the accelerator setup. We immediately lurched forward half a metre or more the very first time I touched the pedal, as it's not quite set up the way I'm used to. On a lot of cars, including the EVs I've driven, the first little bit of pedal travel doesn't do anything. There's a bit of slack, a little tolerance. That allows you to feel that you're pressing the pedal before anything happens. But not so with a Tesla. There is no slack at all. You immediately energise the motor, and since a Tesla is so powerful, getting that wrong can be a tad embarrassing, as it doesn't take a lot of travel to be going quickly. So a little mental rewiring was necessary in that regard, but I didn't do it again, so it's very easy to get used to. Just bear it in mind on your first drive, if you have one. With that little faux pas out of the way, I found most other things to be very natural. In terms of regular driving, it's very easy to get used to, especially the way it was set up, which is ideal for an existing EV owner like myself. On the dynamic settings page, there are three main sets of choices to be made. The one that made me the most happy is under the stopping mode options. I can imagine people who switch to a Tesla from an automatic wanting to use creep to replicate what they know from the auto. But for me, the hold mode is what I want. This is Tesla's name for one-pedal driving, and it's sublime in this car. It makes the car behave exactly the way I would expect, and I will definitely miss that when I return it. In the Zoe, you have to press the brake pedal to bring the car to a halt, but not so this car. Here we lift off the accelerator pedal and the car comes to a complete stop before finally applying the brakes for you without you moving your foot. If you haven't experienced one-pedal driving yet, then you really should. It's such a lovely way of driving a car, and Tesla's setup is really superb. It's extremely refined and uses just the right level of regen to feel natural, and yet allow you to control the car smoothly. That's something I didn't feel able to say for the Tesla Model S I drove some years ago. The regen in that seemed too harsh, too strong, making it really difficult to avoid heavy braking if you disengaged autopilot without first setting your throttle position just right. The Model 3 seemed much better in that regard. The other thing that I preferred over the Model S was the steering. In that Model S, I found the car to be a bit too lively, a bit too reactive to steering input. It felt like I was having to work really hard to keep the car where I wanted it in the lane. It was as if the steering ratio was a bit too fast, but could also have been that the caster was insufficient, so the car didn't centre itself quite right, especially on roads with significant camber, and it could of course also have been a power steering setup issue. In the Model 3, however, I had no such problems at all. I drove the 3 with the steering set to light, but this felt quite nicely weighted to me, and the car felt planted and sat exactly where I wanted it on the road at all times. Indeed, it all seemed to flow so naturally that at times I wondered if I was driving or if the car was. It felt like I didn't need to do anything. The car and I were in such tune that things just happened organically. No drama, no fuss, just easy. That's not to say everything was rosy, however. There were a couple of things I don't like. The main one is that there doesn't seem to be a speed limiter, which is a feature I really missed. EVs are generally very quiet. There is no engine note to give you feedback about your speed, and so I think it's useful to use a speed limiter to keep a check of your speed, especially in town. But that's not an option with the Tesla. There is an audible warning that you can enable, and I did, but that's quite an annoying noise, and I prefer the speed limiter that the Zoe offers. I can turn that on whenever I want it, but even when it's on, I could override it by stamping on the pedal if I ever needed to. So I pretty much always use the limiter in the Zoe. I have to set the speed of that manually, but once it's set, there is no risk of my speed drifting upwards. A very handy feature, sadly missing from the Tesla. The next dislike was that there is more road noise in the cabin than I would have expected. This is a 2021 car and has double pane glass in the front windows to isolate the cabin a bit more. But the Highland model, released in the last year, has that thicker glass all round, and I can imagine that to be a nice improvement. I can also see why other reviewers have talked about the suspension being too firm. It doesn't soak up the undulations in the road very well. I gather that the Highland is said to have resolved that problem too. Moving on to missing interior features, it would have been nice to have a wiper stalk, but I suppose I should be grateful for having an indicator stalk, as that has been deleted from the latest generation car. I mean, that's a terrible idea, isn't it? Our roads aren't a nice, neat grid system here, and we have a lot of roundabouts off which you need to indicate as you go round them. Come on, Tesla, stalks please. You have to wonder if the sales of the Model 3 have been impacted by that omission here in the UK. Let's hope when they refresh the Model Y, they don't double down and do the same with that. I guess they will have to bear in mind the change in Euro NCAP requirements in that regard, perhaps triggered by the Highland. There were a couple of misconceptions I had that turned out to be invalid. The main one is that I thought a lack of a driver's binnacle would bother me, and it really didn't. I got used to the speedo being on the screen almost instantly. It's actually very close to your left hand on the wheel, higher up than you might think, so it's not far from your eye line at all. It still feels like an unnecessary cost-cutting measure to not have one, or a heads-up display in its place, but it didn't really bother me like I thought it would. I also expected the car to feel very big to me, but that wasn't true either. In fact, the body of the car is only 6 centimetres wider than the Zoe, although with the mirrors it's twice that. It is almost 61 centimetres longer though, but somehow that didn't bother me as much as I expected. The reversing camera is very good, very high quality, and the markings are a bit better than those on the Zoe. And this car is from an age when Model 3 came with parking sensors. Not only is the car fitted with ultrasonic sensors, but they still work. I had expected Tesla to disable them in their quest for vision-only everything. But no, they've left them enabled, and I do think they are a worthwhile addition. These tech items help, but somehow the car wears its size really well. Although I've kept a fairly wide berth from tight spaces to avoid any mishaps with someone else's car, I didn't feel it was a lot bigger than the Zoe on the road. This car was optioned with FSD, which has been interesting to try. It's a fairly limited version in comparison to what they have in the States, but it's an interesting addition to experience. Auto lane change takes a little mastery to get the steering input right. Too little and the lane change doesn't happen. Too much and FSD thinks you want to take over and disables itself. The lane keeping, known as auto steer, is extremely good on this car. You don't feel it at all most of the time. It doesn't hunt between the lines at all, as I've experienced with the Zoe, poor thing. On the right-hand bends, the car feels slightly too far to the right to me. It seems to turn just a little early, but it's probably only 15 to 20 centimetres from where I would position the car myself, so I think that's something you would get used to pretty quickly. There's even been a new feature added to the UK version of FSD this week, which is that the car will now drive through green lights without a need for confirmation, but only if you're going straight on and there is a car ahead of you. That hasn't happened to me since the update, so I haven't been able to experience that. FSD is a big topic overall, too big for inclusion in this video, but it's been interesting to try it. Whether I would pay for it myself, I'm not sure. Some of the features of enhanced autopilot might be enough, certainly at the moment. And talking of updates, we should really mention the software. Tesla have really created a new breed, a new generation of car, and not just with the drivetrain. This is a combination of hardware and software, and we've not really seen this level of integration of those two before. This has been dubbed by some commentators as a software-defined car, and I think that's a really good way to think of it. Tesla build the hardware, and there's not much by way of an options list. Each car is pretty much the same. But there are a huge number of software options you can use to tweak its behaviour to suit you, and the options available keep increasing. As each new firmware version comes out, the car becomes more customisable, and you can change it to suit you better. What's more, it all just seems to work. It doesn't seem to suffer from lots of bugs or software crashes or any lockups. The app on the phone is really feature-rich and very fast. The UI is extremely snappy in the car and easy to find your way around. The Zoe, meanwhile, does the occasional weird thing, some odd inconsistency or peculiarity, forcing me to do a reboot of the multimedia system to sort it out. What is noticeable is you can see that the design team have thought about the whole experience, from end to end, and solved for all of it. The car is great. The route planning is class leading. The charging experience is superb. And they all work together so seamlessly. Pretty much every aspect of owning a Tesla has been considered and sculpted. A lot of the ideas that Tesla brought to us over the past 15 years or so are superb. Manufacturers would be proud of any one of them, but Tesla brought them all and made them all work together. Take, for example, Sentry Mode. The car is fitted with cameras, so why not have it record any unusual activity around the car using those cameras? Once you've seen it, it seems so obvious, and anyone could have done it, but Tesla were the ones who did. Dog mode? Tesla. Camp mode? Tesla. Think of a problem and solve it. It's an impressive feat. No wonder their cars are so popular. So we come to the moment of truth. Is this a car I would buy myself? Sadly, I don't think so. There are a few things that would put me off. Firstly, it is bigger than I need. Although it wears its size extremely well, I think I'd still prefer something smaller. The saloon style, with its limited boot opening, would probably also be a bit of a problem. I haven't had equipment in the Zoe all that often. To be fair, the Zoe isn't great for carrying stuff either, but I would prefer something more like a hatch, if possible, for the times I do carry stuff. The harsh ride, I think, might possibly become a bit wearing. And of course, it's a very expensive car. It's not exactly an easy purchase, even as they start to become more widely available on the second-hand market and the prices come down accordingly. But I think the biggest problem, you may not be surprised to hear from me, is comfort in the driving position. I got a lot more comfortable than I expected, helped greatly by having the time to tweak, try and retry, for which I'm very grateful. But unfortunately, I think the seat is probably a bit too sculpted for me and my dodgy back. The lumbar adjustment doesn't change the profile quite enough. And there's also an area in my mid-back which is a bit too well supported. A bit of the seat that sticks out a bit further than I'd like. And I suspect how low the seating position is might be a factor too. I think I tend to be more comfortable the closer I can get the height of my knees to the height of my hips. It was worth a try, and being able to try for a number of days was hugely beneficial in that regard, so thanks again to David for that. But for whatever reason, I seem to be a bit better off in a car with simpler seats. So, for now at least, it's back to the Zoe for me. That's just me though, of course, and my particular back condition. I'm a bit like the princess and the pea when it comes to getting comfortable in car seats. What matters most is how it is for you. If you don't need to try a car for the extended period I do, then Tesla offer test drives. It would be easy for you to have a go yourself and form your own opinions. Why not give it a try? Thanks very much for joining me. Your questions and comments on this subject are most welcome. Have you tried a Tesla? What did you think of the seats? How did you get on with the software and the integration? If you've liked the video, then it's a help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And it would also help me achieve my stretch goal for the channel if you would subscribe as well. Thanks.